I'm here with the amazing composer Michael Price, who've written the music for Sherlock, Unforgotten, and many, many more.
Hello.
So yeah, hi.
Welcome to my humble abode, as they usually say.
It's beautiful here. It's really nice and bright.
Well, we're actually on the top floor of a Victorian busworks in North London. So outside there's very glamorous DIY stores and various other things. But I think when I was looking around for a place to base myself and the people that I work with, then actually having some daylight is so rare. We saw some beautiful studios that were much more soundproof and much more technically accomplished, but being able to look out the window and see the trees and see the seasons change, I think it's lovely. It's really nice.
Yeah. Well, shall we start in here? I can already see.
Yeah, so this side, I mean, some people might say this side is where all the actual work happens, because there's spaces for Nick, who worked with me for 6 or 7 years, I think now. Katie, who runs Contemplative Classical, amongst other things, would sit there. They're at lunch now. I've not killed them. They're not
Okay.
bodies underneath. Obviously, you can see this is sort of a mental world where we break things. So I used to have a bunch of this stuff over on my side, but we set up a separate station, like a processing station. So when I finished a cue, whoever gets the job of sitting here then can either print something through a cassette or through the Nagra. There's 4 different tape echoes there, a couple of space echoes, and then the copycat. 1/4-inch different spring reverb at the top there. So really we're sort of trying to get a little bit of specialization really in that if we're working on a particular project that's using lots of tape techniques and textures, then somebody can sit and do it full time, get into a routine, print stuff with a bit of continuity. But yeah, so that's how it works over on this side of the wall. But I guess we
want to see the other side of the wall. Yeah.
Of course. It's all about the other bit.
Oh wow, that's a lovely selection.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a keyboard graveyard. This is where old synths come to have a nice retirement. It's one of those things I love watching everybody else's Spitfire cribs, because I'm incredibly nosy and I like to see what everybody else has got in their rooms. You don't need all this stuff to do really great scores, and I kind of think when I first started way back when, I had like a little general MIDI sound module, a little Roland sound canvas, and it was the only thing I had. I had that and Cubase running on an Atari. But I knew that thing so well, and even though all the sounds are a bit cheesy, if you detune them and monkeyed about with them, you could get something really interesting out of it. You know, if I was a young writer, I'd look at some of these cribs and kind of go, oh, you can't do anything cool unless you've got a Model D or the CS80 or something. Not true, you can do super cool stuff just on a laptop. Yeah. However, on the other hand, they're great, they're so much fun. And I think it's mostly because trying to create an atmosphere where you can play, where there's some joy and some experimentation. So there's a Eurorack system here. I've no idea how it works. No, who does? Nobody does. If they say they do, they're lying, because they don't really. But on the other hand, if I spend a couple of hours and building a patch, just sort of trying lots of different bits and pieces. There's a CV-based keyboard here that's got a lovely slider and wooden controls, so that you can set up quite an organic way to either play if you're trying to do an on Martineau sort of sound, or alternatively, there's a couple of sequencers in this system so that you can set up some quite chaotic generative patches. Which I actually did that on, there's the middle episode of the last season of Sherlock has got modular weirdness in it. If you're writing really fast, there's no way that you're going to sort of like set up a new patch every time you do a new cue, but I spent an afternoon or two, made some weird, just recorded it as audio and then manipulated it afterwards.
So just curious, how does this ring then respond?
In terms of CV outputs, control voltage outputs, then it's just another way, depending on how you set up the slider over here, so that you can have continually variable pitch, and then there's these little indentations to help guide you sort of where your finger goes, so that rather than being tied into a more sort of specific chromatic scale, then you can use sort of play, and you can do vibrato, all of which can, you know, I think a bunch of different options of how you create how you find the sounds themselves just really sparks off those little bits of humanity and those happy accidents that can lead you into something else. So there's maybe like, you know, there's probably, I think in that episode I did use this. So there's 2 or 3 phrases that you'll hear that have got that kind of weird legato swoop to them with a bunch of delay and a bunch of echo on them. But it was fun making them. There's a whirly, always awesome. There is a CS80, which is ridiculously brilliant. I'm sort of looking after this for somebody at the moment, but they're totally not allowed to have it back. So I think it will have to stay. But there's just sort of, it feels like every instrument or every keyboard has got they've got a signature sound. There's something that's sort of specific about them.
Yeah.
And a bit like with colours, like this isn't the right colour for everything by all means, particularly because it's really distinctive, but it's very, very expressive because everything's got a variety of aftertouches. And if you can do the weirdest things by changing what happens after you press the key. So rather than it being a sort of like a more traditional keyboard where once you've hit it, it's done its thing, the polyphonic aftertouch on this is absolutely incredible. Or most people would recognise the little sub-fatty, a monopoly, Korg monopoly. This is one of the least favoured of the Moog synths. It sounds like a bee in a bottle, but sometimes you want a bee in a bottle, so that's fine. Juno 10.6, not the 60. Everybody else has got the 60, and it sounds awesome, but this just sounds different. It was the first synth that I fell in love with when I was a teenager, when they first came out, which dates me. But there's something very reassuring, I think, about the middle of it for pads. It just has has its own thing. This is one of the reissue Model Ds. So this is the sort of new for old ones that came out last year, I think. And it was incredible because the packaging is all like brand new, but is the same design it was in the 70s or whenever they originally designed it. So you have the full experience of being the first person who bought one. And they sound awesome, but also they've got MIDI and they're not broken. And it's just, again, it's just so, there's something just very, nothing else really sounds like that.
Yeah.
It's a terrible idea for lots of different scores, but when it's the right idea, it's
the right idea.
Yeah, definitely the right idea. There's an OP1 in here, which are really sweet. It's a little sort of travelling synth, really. They're great. It's even charged up. Not only, this is the one with the sequencer and the little tape, like a 4-track sort of tape emulation recorder, but as well, there's the sounds obviously sound a bit sort of tinny out of the little speaker, but they're quite unique and expressive if you play them on a track. Or I've started using this live, particularly because it's about 1,000th of the weight of this, or something. Like, it is a very convenient thing to take on a train, whereas a CS80 is not. And if you patch this into either a guitar amp or a PA, then it's surprisingly expressive with the controllers that you've got. And yeah, again, it's just a different way of thinking, I think, a different set of sounds. A rack of guitar pedals. I think it's probably one of the first ways that some people get out of the box, because it's a really cheap way to do it, is to, if you've got an interface with a couple of ins and outs, then you can buy a 20 quid guitar pedal from, Cash Converters or off a mate, and you start to get that experience of actually kind of crunching something, or I don't know whether it's how you use it rather than what it sounds like, whether you're just in a different headspace when you're not looking at a screen and when you're just monkeying about. But again, you get to interesting places, I think, with hardware. Oh yes, toys. Toys of various kind. the little Korg boxes. These are cool. What's fun with some of these is that it's because quite a few of them are battery operated.
Yeah.
Then you can actually just sit on the sofa and fiddle about when you should be doing some proper work. and these ones all link together as well. They got the bass one and the keys, so you can just use the little sync
and then hook them up.
Hook them up, and they'll all play along.
Oh, great!
Kind of jolly. And then a couple of drum
There's a little
modules.
self-built one.
This, it was a fine piece of craftsmanship I built myself out of a little kit. You can get, there's all these sort of like build yourself a camera kit, but you can build yourself a synth with a tiny little circuit board and a battery. But it's surprisingly, I mean, obviously it's kind of, it's very specific.
Yeah.
But already, I think that's cool. Record it with a mic from its little tinny speaker, put some reverb on it, and, well, you can guarantee it's not going to sound quite like anything else.
Yeah, I love the design of the...
Yeah, I mean, literally, it looks like I didn't even bother gluing that in. Very shoddy craftsmanship there, very poor. Do you know, I'm not going to say that I spend, you know, if you're trying to write 5 or 6 minutes of finished music a day, there's a limited amount of time that you can spend monkeying about with homemade synths. But
when you do you have a favourite one that you go to?
Doubling the double basses with Model D, so that you can kind of play, when you play the pass, then you sort of perform the filter. Just is a sort of timeless fattening out, which just always works. So sometimes if I'm doing Unforgotten, I might put the Model D over just next to me so that I can just constantly be playing it in all the time. So that is obviously a legendary thing. And then it's hard to sort of to be standing next to a CX-80 without kind of going, easily the best synth that's ever been made. So there's an expressiveness that some of the synths have got, and how you interact with them, that I think it's more than about the kind of the state that you go into when you're working with them. Yeah. And so it doesn't matter whether they cost like 50 quid or more. There's a sort of, I don't know, kind of a connection with you as the performer or as the composer that can start to kind of complete that connection between what you're thinking and what the audience is going to hear, and what emotional message that's going to come through. So there's a sort of some instruments and players will tell you the same thing, whether it's guitar or violin or whatever, that certain instruments just help that communication. Yeah. And when you find one, you don't want to let it go, really. It's like, no, you can't have it back. That's mine. That is now mine.
You like writing on paper?
Yeah.
But at the same time, do you also enjoy the approach of if you just go here into your fun corner and just have that sense of surprise and the sounds? Because when you write on paper, you have to have a certain idea of, or being able to imagine what it's going to sound like, whereas coming in here, it's sort of the opposite of that approach.
If the original idea is to communicate an emotion, there are an almost infinite amount of ways to do that musically. Different starting points, I think, seem to produce different results for me. So if I come and monkey about for a couple of hours, plug some headphones on and make bleepy noises, then it's a sort of like almost a sonic discovery process, which kind of leads you in one certain direction. If I sit down at the piano, or even, I mean, my ear's not that great, but just about good enough to sit in a coffee shop with manuscript and not use the piano and just go straight onto paper. And there's a sort of, that gives you a certain view of sound, because you're having to, rather than this, where you're sort of experiencing the sound almost physically, then paper, particularly without checking it on a piano, is like right at the other end of the spectrum, because you're having to conceive the entire thing inside your head and then try and find a way to notate it. And then there's all points in between. So I'll frequently work with the piano, work with the keyboard and paper to write tunes. because there's something about the structure of like a really good melody, a sort of 8, 16 bar, 32 bar phrase, that working, that sort of finding the structure of it on paper seems to really, really help. And just improvising doesn't really always get there. I like to sort of slow down and look at it in a different way. Also, if I'm trying to overcome my inabilities as a keyboard player, then paper is a really good way to do it, because I know if I improvise, which I love doing, I'll fall into the same patterns and the same voicings and the same habits. And so stepping away from that and writing things down chord by chord gives me a sort of a way into that produces denser, more interesting material. And sometimes that's right and sometimes that's not right. So if I'm doing some underscore and under some dialogue, then I'll improvise that, or certainly do a couple of passes, because there's something about accompanying effectively a singer that whenever I write it down, I get much too clever and there's too many suspensions and it's all a bit fancy. Whereas if I'm just holding down a sound, then you leave the space that you need for the dialogue, for the story, for the rest of it.
So let's have a look at your station over here.
Great. Walk this way. Having watched lots of these cribs of other much better composers than me, it's fascinating what's the same and what's different in people's rooms, because we're all, I mean, you know, there's brilliant demos, we're all sort of facing the same sort of challenges. So there's lots of stuff that's definitely the same, I think, in my room. So there's Logic, so writing Logic, and then there's Pro Tools over here. And once I've finished a cue, I'll bounce it down. The template's set up to bounce in stems automatically, but I'll bounce a stereo and then drop it across into Pro Tools, and that'll build up the reel or the episode, or in this case, which is, I'm just setting up for Unforgotten Season 3, so I've got all of Season 1 and Season 2 in there as well, so that if I need to refer back or reuse a stem or do something like that, then I can.
So you've got a Raven here.
Raven, yes.
How long have you been working with that?
I've had it probably about a year now, and I think I've tried quite a few combinations of control surfaces, the Avid mix ones, there's an SSL one that's nice. This one sort of stuck, mostly because the macros and the keyboard shortcut programming I'd quite liked. And once in a while I will use it to draw in a line of expression. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, is it faster than using the mouse? I don't know, it's just different. I've got one of those single fader port boxes, which I'll use for doing rides, because it's always a bit funny on a touch screen. But I use a original iPad 1, this first generation iPad, vintage iPad, running Touch OSC, and Nick, who is awesome at these things, has programmed a bunch of pages for me. This is a Spitfire one with a bunch of keyboard shortcuts, dynamics, expression, vibrato. Some of the more complex ones, like I use the sample modeling trumpet a lot, and that's got like growl and flutter tongue and some weird other things. And so to save me having to remember which parameter maps against which thing, then you can just swap to the appropriate page for the appropriate instrument. So once it's set up, I've always really liked that. I don't know why, and it's still working. So if it...
There's a good response when you play in and you use it?
Yes, somehow. I mean, we ended up making the area for my finger, my useless fat fingers, wider, so that it kind of, you don't need to be that accurate. And also we could make them high, like as high as the iPad. So even though it's not a physical fader, I've kind of got used to the response.
Mm-hmm. Is there a specific app you can download?
Yeah, I think this is built in Touch OSC, Touch OSC. But there's 2 or 3 of those different sort of platforms that you can customize. There's a bunch of Outboard. Plugins are really great these days. Is it worthwhile spending what is a not trivial amount of money on on Outboard. I guess it depends on, for you, whether the extra 5% difference is inspiring. Is it something where it kind of brings something to your sense of the process? And so there's a bunch of different mic pre's. So there's a couple of Neve channels that have been racked up. These Focusrite producer packs are really good. These are 2 channels from a Studer desk that have been racked up. So if I'm doing any recording in terms of, I've usually got some mics that are up on stands somewhere, then they can go through those, or I can patch them in on the patch bay so that I can process stems or process a synth sound if I wanted. These 2 are on the master bus, the master stereo bus, most of the time, because this Rupert Neve master bus processor has got some special magic. I'm not quite sure what it's doing, but it's great. And this EQ is just very clean. Because we swap sessions all the time here, then I've got plug-in equivalents, or I've tried to get as close as I can with plugins to the sounds of these, so that on Logic you can have an I/O plugin that you can switch in or out, which basically then routes out through the patch bay, so that I can either run the session in the box, or with 2 or 3 clicks it'll go straight out through the hardware. And I persuade myself I can always hear the difference, but that might be confirmation bias because I've spent all the money, so it's like, it's got to be worth it. That's worth every penny.
So I can see you've got a big template loaded here. Is that something that is permanent, or do you set up a new template for each project?
Yeah, I think I try and do a new template for everything, for each new show, each film, each new series of a project. If it's something like Unforgotten or Sherlock that's gone to multiple series, then I'll start from the same, I'll load up the same template, blow the dust off it, and develop with whatever's new. There might be some new sounds that we've made, there might be some new bits of kit that have been purchased. There's something about those first 2 or 3 days of kind of finding the sonic signature for a show that is kind of interesting. This is a cue from Unforgotten, which is predominantly lots of pianos, lots of sort of echoey pianos, and some strings and various sort of like some pads. I've worked with Matt Bowdler, and he did some new sounds for me, or new presets for Omnisphere and Zebra. Again, just trying to get a little character that isn't too preset-y, although, you know, happily use a preset if it's the right thing for the job. And this template's already set up to bounce down to stems at the bottom. The stems match up with our final mix stems as well. So on this show, Joe Rubel, who records and mixes it, when he's mixed a cue, I can drop it back from Pro Tools back into Logic, and the stems all come out of the same place. So that means if I want to take the strings but not the synths, I can use the live strings that we record and then play piano over the top of it, or make any other changes. I guess with this particular cue, it's really the live strings that are selling it. But that's, although they sound beautiful and it's beautifully played, it's only actually 12 strings, and with a little support from samples. But I'd usually write split out first, seconds, violas, cellos, basses already, so that the kind of making it work from a voicing point of view I would do, and then whoever's orchestrating or preparing the parts, their job is then more about making sure that articulation and dynamics are captured quickly enough so that when we play it on the session, it sounds like it should do. There's also the wonderful Peter Gregson somewhere here in the box. So this is the real Peter Gregson, not the Spitfire sample Peter Gregson. He's a virtual person. Such a good noise. So in a way, there's kind of I mean, you can see the number of tracks. There's kind of, I don't know, there's what, 9? You know, there's not much going on, and that's a weird sub thing that shouldn't be there. So it's not for this particular cue in this particular show is not complex in the number of actual sort of instruments playing, but because even on a sort of on a UK budget show like this, I just try and get as many people playing as we can. So a dozen strings and then Peter playing beautiful solo cello over the top carries quite a lot of heart, quite a lot of emotional punch.
Have you used the space to record live instruments?
I have, yes, I have recorded Peter sitting over there in the corner once before, but now there are too many synths to get anybody. There's no room. I've filled it up like a junk shop.
And then you've got some overtone.
Yeah, I've been thinking part of there's a big debate, particularly in TV, there's a big debate about intelligibility of dialogue, and also from a music point of view, what will work. And so if you're listening on full range monitors and it all sounds beautiful and you can hear down to 20 hertz, then it will guide you in a certain direction. But if you switch to some form of smaller speaker, these ones are just quite convenient and sound actually quite good. Obviously, you don't get the bottom end at all, but there's certain things that you hear quite clearly. You then really can check whether your idea is working, and what will happen when your mum hears it on her tiny telly in the corner and all the bottom end has dropped out. So I use those little Avontones to either check if there's a specific thing in the bottom end that I want to see whether it's working or not, but also when I'm balancing a quick time to send to the director or to the producers, I'll usually balance the dialogue and the music using those, because it's a lot closer. A lot of people are listening to what you send them on laptops, and you're sort of, if you're relying on the fact that your sub is doing the work, then you will get a lot of notes stroke fired quite soon.
You also write music for yourself, so you've got a bit of music released on erased tapes, right?
Sure.
So what's your approach to writing music for yourself rather than for film and TV?
It's such an important part of, I think, any composer, any artist's work is the work that you generate because you want to, because there's a story that you want to tell, and there's a sound world that you want to create that is not necessarily the shape it is because of the shape of a story or the shape of a character. And I love film and TV scoring. I love the camaraderie. I like being part of a team. I love the storytelling. I love the fact that you can often be part of a group endeavor that can reach millions and millions of people around the world. It's a fabulous thing to do, but there's something different about, and more personal, I think, about effectively coming up with the story yourself. And so for 5 or 6 years now, I've worked with Robert Raths at Erased Tapes, and he put out an EP of 4 string quartets that I'd done. And I'd done them just with no intention in mind. I'd got this string quartet in for a pop session I was doing in the morning, just decided to keep them there for the afternoon, and wrote some quartets quickly that week. And when we recorded them just for fun. But there was something there, so there's no click tracks, there's no picture, you don't need to shape it around anything else. Things could just breathe. And then that started a relationship and a process that led to an album called Entanglement that I recorded in Berlin now about 3 years ago, and a new project that I was recording all through last year that is still a bit secret, but they'll be coming out later in the year. It's nourishing and fascinating and fulfilling to do for myself, but it's also interesting what you bring to a collaborative situation. If you have found a way to sort of express yourself musically that isn't depending on anything else, that you're sort of creating these complete worlds, then I think that's interesting for directors and producers as well, because you've really sort of been on that journey yourself in a way that they have to be when they create a show or a film or a script from scratch. And almost subconsciously, you can connect with them in a way that's not necessarily true if you feel a bit just more like kind of, you know, like a hired hand. You can like hear just at the last minute, put some music on and then go away. So I like to have those relationships with collaborators that are based on mutual respect and where we're all trying to make something the most beautiful thing that we can, or the funniest thing, or the most exciting thing. I think there's something that sort of expands your vision and your reach as a composer, as a musician, which is joyful. It's joyful.
Do you write a lot of it in here as well? And does the setup work for you in that respect?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think the reality is that there's the perfect situation, the ideal situation, and then there is what needs to get done. What I try and do with this space is have it sort of customizable enough so that if I just want to work quietly, I just turn all the screens off, turn all the electronics off, and just have a piano sound and a pencil, and then you can kind of find that quiet space inside you if you need to. If there's a recording tomorrow, you can find anything. It's just whatever you need to do.
That's really great. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for coming along.